The city of Hagerstown has written some new language into its code enforcement laws in hopes of gaining ground on the problem of dilapidated and abandoned properties in the city. Ken, do you believe this new legislation is going to help?
Well, I mean, why are we focusing on, the building codes of empty buildings? Why don't we focus on filling those buildings instead?
But
that would be a great idea.
part of the problem is the buildings are so run down on the inside, and you can't fill a building if it's going to collapse on people.
But there are buildings in this town that aren't run down, and
Right.
then the reality is, architecturally, there are a lot of buildings that may not be good on the inside that architecturally are very nice. And I would argue that if you build it, they will come. I mean,
That's
look
very
at what
true.
happened in Frederick, look at what happened in other communities.
Yeah.
We need, and somebody mentioned earlier about the pop-up shops
Mm-hmm.
relative to a candidate.
Oh, I love the pop-up
I got to
shops.
tell you,
Yeah, they're wonderful.
and I don't know who, I still don't know who did that. I don't think it was government. I think there was a private group that really.
I heard it was High Rock.
I heard that same thing,
The
that they were,
Doddridges.
they were
Yes.
very involved in
It's,
it.
And
The,
it's
the bottom
downtown
line, though,
movement.
is it's genius.
It is.
And, the people that have done that have been successful with it. They're going around, they're going out, they're saying, this is a great thing to do, this is a great place to be, and yes, it only happens during Blues Fest and the tree lighting and some other specific times of the year, but, that to me is a great way to start.
Well, and just to kind of use a metaphor here, when you're starting a fire, all right, you don't start the fire and light the entire fire all at once. You start it with a small spark, all right, and I think that's what the downtown movement and the pop-up shops really are, is it's a spark to try to ignite growth of Hagerstown. And I think it's a wonderful thing,
I don't think the dilapidated building legislation is going to work. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to work because, number one, I think the people that are most problematic with it will find a way around it, number one. Number two, I think that you're going to have problems with the Historic Commission once you start trying to tear down some of these buildings that somebody thinks should be re-outfitted with wood windows at some
Right.
outrageous cost. I just don't think it'll work.
What about when it gets into a safety issue? We've seen the homeless gentleman who tried to make a furnace out of his bathtub and wound up burning down an entire city building almost. Does that sway you a little bit, Brittany, that might make this a little more palatable?
I absolutely think that we need to do something with the buildings that are unsound, because otherwise they're just, not only are they an eyesore, but they really are a risk to even like entire blocks of buildings. But I agree with Jen to some extent that I'm not sure that it's viable. Part of the legislation was to have the owners of the buildings pay for the cost of tearing down the building, as well as any in-court fees that could potentially amount. And I just don't see, if they're not taking care of their building already, I can't see them paying for that kind of
Well,
expenditure.
and we've already got incentives available to help, property owners fill their properties and actually, get, like a store or residents in those buildings. Once again, and this isn't the first time that we've discussed this on this panel. Why are we going to use a stick when we should just be using a carrot and provide incentives for property owners to fill the buildings, not punish them for having the buildings empty?
Well, that brings up another question. Jim, do we even know who a lot of these property owners are?
Well, I'm sure the city knows who they are. I mean, I don't know.
The city owns some of the properties.
Yeah,
don't
I
they?
couldn't, and that's quite frankly another issue is I'm not one that believes that the city should go out and buy every abandoned property.
Right.
We have a history of what we do is we buy a property at probably a little bit above market value. We spend $100,000 or $150,000 in fixing it up, and then we sell it for half of what we got in it.
Right.
So number one, that's picking a winner in the private sector that's going to benefit from that work. Number two, I don't think the city should be in the landlord business.
But my understanding of this is that a lot of these vacant properties are, it's unknowable who has them because they've been sold into
Setting.
these LLCs and they're packaged, they're bundled, they're owned by some conglomerate out of New York City. The city
That's
would
what I
not be able
heard.
to find the owner if it wanted to. At what point do you just say, enough, we're going to move in and we're going to start using eminent domain to take some of these down or fix them up?
You could, but then again, the historic district, where do they come into play and when do they start screaming? Because they have in
They
the
do.
past screamed very loudly about all kinds of things.
They do.
Even signs hanging off
Even
buildings.
signs hanging off of museums.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
and you know, and using eminent domain can really become a bad precedent, because you certainly don't want Hagerstown to become known as, well, if you're not doing what we want with, you know, your property, we're just going to use eminent domain and take the property from you. That's not going to be considered business friendly, and you know, I would be nervous to move a business in if,
Yeah.
you know, if Hagerstown's going to do that.
But at the same time, I hear at my museum visitors that come in from out of state that wonder why there's so many empty buildings with torn paper on the window fronts and
Sure.
stuff. So I think if we want to increase the amount of tourism inside Hagerstown specifically, we have to do something with the buildings.
That would bring up my
eyesore.
next question. Has Hagerstown at this point sunk so low from a standpoint of dilapidated buildings that some kind of radical action has to be taken?
I think
I don't
so.
think so.
I think so.
I don't think we're there yet.
You break the tie.
I don't think we're there. I don't think
Not
we're
yet.
there. I think there's some pressure that needs to be applied on certain property owners, and I am all for, especially when it comes to safety. I think we need to have that foremost in our minds, because at the end of the day, if the city doesn't do something about it, they're going to be a party to a lawsuit as well.
Absolutely.
But again, I think the answer is growth, not legislation,
Yes,
not
absolutely.
punitive. And this is what they do. They write legislation that is punitive. That's what I see come out of there.
Yes. And I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about punitive legislation in a later segment.
It's a
on this
fair
too.
assessment.
So,
Okay. Well, I think we're agreed. The answer is to take up all these empty buildings and give them to Syrian refugees.
There you go. Absolutely.
Next up, the county has compiled a list of their accomplishments in the last year. Our panel will analyze those accomplishments.